I hired Daragh at Cuttable. I didn't hire him. I was the recruiter that was leading the hiring team with the founders that hired Daragh. For that role, we had, don't quote me, but we had close to a couple of hundred applicants for that role. And we were really clear that what we needed for that role was someone who'd been the first-time product manager previously, so we could hopefully learn from everything that they'd learned in previous roles that could help us get to product market fit quicker, smoother, and make it easier all around for everybody. Daragh had been product manager at Mr. Yum, now called Me&U, and had been the first-time product manager there. In this discussion, he talks about how that happened, how he went from never having been a product manager before to being the first-time product manager, and in the nicest sense, making it up as he was going along. He'll talk about then coming on board at Cuttable and being a second-time, first-time product manager, if that makes any sense at all. What I really like about Daragh's approach is that in and amongst all the technical side of things, he recognizes that the user, the customer, is at the heart of everything that product teams should be building. You'll hear him talk a lot about customer interviews, dealing with customers, understanding them, understanding their problems, and making sure that ties back into products that are getting built. So I hope you enjoy this one. If you're a product manager or if you're a founder thinking of hiring your first product manager, you should get a lot out of this discussion. All the best. Enjoy.
Can see it.
You too. Tell me, you've done it twice now. What's it like being the first product manager?
It's exciting. It's something I really enjoy doing, being super hands-on, trying to find where you're going while it's not very clear where you're going and constantly changing. It can be pretty challenging and tough, but from my point of view, it's something I really enjoy, trying to understand the space that we're in, understand the problems that we're trying to solve and the problems that we need to solve for our users as well.
Yeah. Prior to your current business, Cuttable, obviously where we know each other, at Me&U, formerly called Mr. Young. How did that role come about?
I had got to know the team, Mr. Yum, through my venues. So I also own a bunch of hospitality venues, restaurants and bars, and we were looking for a new table ordering platform. We previously used another one. We built an app around that, and we just weren't seeing the development that we needed as these other players were coming in, and Me&U and Mr. Yum were two of those big players. We kind of went around and had a look at the different products and settled on Mr. Yum as the best products at the time, and it still is. And we reached out and started using the products at some of our venues. And at that stage, it was still quite early on, and we were giving a decent amount of feedback on the product itself. And there was a number of integration that we needed around our point of sale. We're trying to, I guess, to bridge the gap a little bit with some of those relationships we had with our POS providers, with Mr. Yum. And that was around the time COVID hit. I think it was maybe a week before we were about to go live at some of the venues, and obviously threw everything into a tailspin and led to a couple of things. One, for me at the venues, my role at the time was opening new venues, coming up with concepts, branding, getting the venues launched, and then going on and looking at the next venue. And with COVID, that was, at that time, it wasn't clear if we were going to survive at all, let alone if we were going to be opening new venues. That was me going from doing a bunch to doing not a lot, aside from worrying about keeping the venues alive. And that led to me being on the couch for a few months playing PlayStation and getting sick of that. And my girlfriend is a UX researcher, and she was at the time looking to do a short course in product management, potentially looking to do that. And she decided not to. And I asked her for details on what she was looking at and learned more about it, and decided, hey, why don't I do this course? So I just had so much time on my hands. I ended up doing postgrad in that at RMIT, finished that up, and I'd known the team at StartUp and Kim, who's the CEO. We'd been chatting a lot. She put up one day that she was looking for a product manager, and I sent her a message and we had a chat, and a couple of weeks later I started. So this was still deep in the middle of COVID. It was interesting. We weren't meant to be in the office. A couple of us were going in every now and then. First time in the role, couldn't get out there and talk to customers very easily, couldn't go to any events to talk with other product managers. So it was a great experience, but probably one of not the most ideal time to be doing that. But it was a real, I guess, pressure cooker moment. Everything was piled in. The business was growing at a huge rate due to COVID and the requirements around ordering. And yeah, so it was a pretty full on experience. I think the first 8 months myself was the only product manager there and learned a lot. But yeah, that's how I got into that one.
Nice. And how was that transition from going from working in venue to then in a tech company? I'm guessing that from your role in venues, you almost had a bit of sort of project management background from an organizing and being able to sort of document what jobs to be done and tasks and that sort of thing.
It was probably more leaning on the marketing side of things and branding and coming up with concepts. So in terms of working in venue, wasn't working in venue. Would work from venue is probably a better way to phrase that one, but either from head office or not at home, from head office. The transition was interesting. I think a lot of people always ask me about that. How do you go from being your own boss? Why would you go work for someone else? And I never really saw it that way. I think I saw this as an opportunity for me to learn and expand on my skills. And what I'd been doing at the venues I'd been doing it for a long time. I've been in hospitality since I was 13. We'd owned and operated, I think, probably about 35 venues at that time. So we'd done this a number of times. And for me, it was getting quite stale and looking for something different, and always had an interest in technology and internet and computers as a child. And my dad used to take me to computer swap meets and used to always play around with computers, but never had the opportunity, I guess, to explore that because I started my businesses quite young. And it was always a case of, do I explore this interest, which may not lead to anything, or do I work hard and make sure we pay the rent and don't get evicted? That was the choice that we had to make out of necessity. Like when we were running those venues really early on, it was insane hours, sleeping in venues, trying to keep things going. But as we progressed and we got more experienced and at running venues, I could work myself out of that. Been doing it a long time. I was really ready for that change.
Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily a jarring thing, even though COVID was an unexpected thing. There was definitely a positive for me. And that was, if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have had that room to explore those other options.
Good tip for people. Being able to pay rent is a good thing.
Yeah, especially when it's the rent for the businesses as well. You can always live with mum and dad. But
what are the transferable skills that you have?
I think when we talk about product, it can be so different at different organizations. So, would I talk about my sound somewhat foreign to other product managers, but in my experience, obviously project management to a degree. I know product managers and hate getting confused with project managers, but there's a lot of elements of we need to get various stakeholders and people in the business on board. And one part of that is really around communication, especially when things are moving so fast. I liken that to building a venue. Building venues, everything can be on track. And then one day you're like, all right, we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with the fact that we've got no gas and it's not going to get installed for 3 months and we need to adjust our hiring policy. That can be quite daunting for people that are maybe not used to working in startups or in their own business, or they're used to things being quite planned out. The ability to manage those twists and turns is really important. Listening to customers, I think, is a big one. It's very easy in venues and even in product itself to not be close to customers and forget about them. But ultimately, it's all about the customer. The customer's not going to come back to the restaurant or sign up or continue signing up or signing into the apps that you're building if we're not listening to their needs and reading between the lines a little bit there. They'll tell us something that isn't necessarily the root problem. So being able to dig a little bit deeper and calm people down, understand you might be frustrated by something or a bug, your meal, but what's the bigger problem? I think there's a bunch of things that have transferred across. And then obviously there's a lot of completely brand new skills that came along with moving into that role.
Yeah. Do you think there's a particular type of person that's suited to a startup?
I think there's lots of different types of people. I think in terms of characteristics, I think people with high agency are really important. Don't need to be told what to do because often it's not clear what does need to be done. And you need to get in there and muck in and figure out what has to happen. Accountability, especially when you're at these small startups, there's no backup. Or someone else will pick this up. You're either the only person in that role, or maybe you're the only person in multiple roles. I think that accountability, that agency, being okay with change and uncertainty and resilience, I think some skills that are probably going to bode well for people in their startups. Yeah.
Any hard lessons you've learned along the way? that you want to share?
Plenty of hard lessons. How long have we got?
Top of your head.
I think right off the top of my head is not assuming things. I think it's really easy to assume things if you're in a call, maybe not interrogating something. As you're seeing someone, I remember a feature that we pushed out for a customer when I was at Mr. Yum, and the guy that I was talking to was quite frustrated that we didn't have this feature out, and we pushed to get it out on a Friday. When we released it on a Friday, and it ended up causing an issue that meant we had to roll it back. And I promised this guy that this was going to be live before service on Friday, and I was pretty concerned about calling him up to say, hey, this is, we've released it, but we're going to have to roll it back. And I obviously bit the bullet and gave him a call. And when I called him up, he was like, yeah, no problem, mate, all good. And I had made the assumption that this was something that had to happen, and it actually didn't. It turns out he was just frustrated by something else. So really not making those assumptions, clarifying, understanding if this doesn't happen, what the impact going to be. Again, like reading into those details, because people aren't always going to tell you what the truth is. Sometimes they're going to bend that truth to get the results that they want. That's when I always come back to. It essentially brought down most of the product.
Yeah.
And it could have been resolved by having a follow-up conversation and just saying, hey, just wanted to double check, if we don't get this done by Friday, what's the impact going to be on the business?
Yeah.
And he would have said, oh, it's not a problem, we can deal with this next week. But I didn't do that, and we had an incident. It wasn't too bad though. It was resolved in a few minutes, but still, it was a lot of stress for a lot of people in the business and at venues when it didn't need to be.
Yeah. I'm interested in your thoughts on what it's like working really closely with a founder. Obviously, early stage business. You mentioned the word agency earlier. Emotional and sometimes financial attachment to the business with founders. They have this vision of where they want the business to go, and you're the first person who's leading the product. What's it like managing the expectations, that relationship? Because there's potential for that to go badly if a founder's vision isn't actually what you can deliver or way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think obviously founders have a very strong opinion on where things need to go. I always lead to going back to the data and what customers are saying. And I think it's important for founders obviously to be committed to their opinion on and views on things, but also needing to be open to what the data is saying. So I think if I think about what that looks like, if you're not doing that and we're just going by people's opinions, whether it's the founder or whether it's someone in the senior leadership team or anything like that, again, not interrogating those beliefs, I think can cause problems. And it's really hard because I've been lucky to work with amazing founders, but I have product manager friends who have been in situations that are not as good as that. And I luckily haven't had to deal with that, but it's very challenging. But the thing I would always talk about is going back to that customer, getting that data, running experiments. If there is a strongly held opinion that this is the way we need to go, all right, how can we test that out? How can we experiment, run some A/B tests on this to see if this is a direction that we want to take? So, yeah.
Nice. And so when you're, say, at an interview stage and you're talking to founders, you're trying to understand how you could work with them and understand their expectations. How do you shape that conversation, understand their thinking?
I think that's a really hard one because you might only be on a call for half an hour, and obviously they're busy, and in these high growth startups, they're probably hiring multiple people. I don't have a perfect way to do this. And sometimes you just have to go with your gut, and there's no real checklist of what you're seeing. But I think it's also obviously talking to the founders, but also talking to the team as well. And that's probably where you might get a little bit more information there. Talk to me, ask them when people always ask, what questions do you have for me? Can you give me an example of a time you might have a tension with one of the founders or someone in the leadership team? How did the team deal with that? How did you deal with that? How did the founder or the leader deal with that? I think is a good way to get some insights there. But yeah, still, I think I've been quite lucky in that regard. But yeah.
Mr. Yum, you'd have been through periods of high growth, lots of hiring, and no doubt you'd have been involved in some of those interviews and those hiring processes. How important, particularly in these stages, those hires, those next hires?
I think really important. I think a bad hire can have just, if not a worse impact on no hire. I think, especially with high growth startups, especially when they get funding, there can be a lot of the time a very clear message from the VC, you need to be hiring and just filling bodies, which I think can be very dangerous. So having that caution there to really understand, do we need this role now? Because there's always going to be an impact as well on the current team when we're onboarding people, and what if you have people standing around going, what do you need me to do? What am I doing? I think being really cautious there, it's a tough one because you can't turn around a hire instantly. So you have to find that balance of where are we going to be at in 2, 3, 4 months, however long that process is going to take. How do we find that balance? And yeah, it's better than it's a tough one to get right.
Have you ever been in interviews with people, and you mentioned gut just then, but you've been in interviews and pretty early on, you've just know this is yes, someone I think okay, first, like you just know, right?
Yeah, definitely. I guess probably the question is, have those calls been right every time?
Oh, yeah.
Because, the people you say no to, generally you never see them again. And there's a lot of people I know that are not great in that interview process. And I was talking to a designer I used to work with, and he's going through the hiring process at the moment and talking about these case studies that get taken home. And is that a proper representation of the way people work? And his opinion is no. And I'd lean towards that as well. That interview process, we don't do work like that when we're actually on the job in most roles. So yeah, knowing if they're the right pick, I'd like to think that in most cases when I'm like, it's an yes, it's a definite that those have been right. The one I always think about is the no way.
Yeah.
How did they get, what are they not showing me that got them to a position that they're at today?
Yeah.
And what are they not showing in this interview or through this process? I think it's always interesting because sometimes I've also worked with people who I haven't interviewed, and I go, first time chatting to them, first call, I'm like, not sure about these people. But then when you get into work with them and understand the way they work, you're like, actually, this is a good hire. And I always think, as anyone slipped through the cracks there in that process.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? The whole process of interviewing. It's this sort of almost unnatural scenario that feels very manufactured. Most of us aren't like that day to day anyway. And we try and follow a process that helps us get all the data and the info that we need, but we still rely on gut as well sometimes.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit then about early stage team culture, trying to build teams. We've got this group of people that have come together from all different walks of life, hopefully have some common traits and some common personality traits that brought them together and put them in place. But how do you start building team cohesion, team culture
I don't even know if I have that answer. I think if I think about not just from startups, but from my own businesses, it's really about communication, leading from example, keeping people in the loop. I think I always try to give as much context as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm not perfect at this, but if I have a request, I'll always try and say, here's a question, this is what I'm asking for, versus saying, here's the question, and people go, what's actually being asked. And you talked about, especially in a leadership position or an ownership position, asking questions can sometimes absolutely send shockwaves through employees if they're like, why did Daragh ask about this? What's going on? Is something happening? So for me, it's really giving context, I think really helps with that. Hey, I'm asking about this. I'm not asking you to make any changes here. I'm just trying to understand this for the following reason. And I think about that as well in startups coming in, when people maybe don't understand how I work, and maybe if they've never worked with a product manager, they might be quite uncomfortable with the amount of questions that I'm asking. And why is Daragh asking all these questions? He keeps asking what may seem like the same questions over and over again. But if they haven't worked with a product manager before, they may not be comfortable with that. They might see that as is Daragh personally attacking the way I'm doing things? And especially when I guess you're in that small startup where it might be just that one person. You're that one person in marketing, you're that one person in sales. And it's not an attack on that person. It's questioning, how can we improve things? How can we get things better? Because often the way things are set up maybe for a reason, but maybe not for any reason. That's just the way we did it somewhere else. And is it suited for the state the business is in? Maybe not. Why are we using that tool? That's just a tool I know how to use, or we're getting a free trial for whatever that might be. So I think interrogating how we're doing things, and also just trying things out. Things are definitely not going to be set in stone. So yeah, going back to the talking about traits, people that are willing to trial new things, understand that things are going to change. I think identifying those kind of people and making sure that they're the kind of people that are in the business are really helpful, because yeah, seeing those culture people coming in going, this is the way I do things and I'm not willing to bend. It may have worked amazingly at a previous role, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work in this new role. And you always have this different combination of people and factors and inputs that mean that there's no guide. You can't pick up a guide and say, this is how a startup should work.
Yeah, I agree. Back to your point about trusting your gut when it's a no to somebody that you're interviewing. I've had countless situations like that, and you see that person then go to another business and be really successful. And then I've had from in the business that I was working, we said no, and then we should have hired that person. Look how good they are. Like, they've done X, Y, Z. And my mindset is, well, it's a different business. Just because a player can play really well for Arsenal, get transferred to Chelsea, and it's a different team. It's a different playing style, different ways of communicating. So I think you always need to be hiring to the way you operate.
Yep.
I think one of your points there, this thing about, I'm going to call it mindful communication, but I think early days within a business, you're dealing with a whole bunch of people. Everything's new ways of working, new ways of communicating, new sets of customers, new founders. But I think this thing about mindful communication is really important. And I think back to our time at Cuttable together, I think you were instrumental in really pushing, trying to get us. I think we were in danger of having death by meetings, because we had 7 teams, 7 things, and you're saying that it'll go down in Cuttable folklore, no agenda, no agenda. The simple things like being mindful of other people's time. And does this have to be a meeting? Is it a Slack update? Is it an update? And this idea of transferring information or transforming information, really important as well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of making sure things are documented, and there's so many reasons that should happen. For me personally, it just helps me refine what I actually am trying to say. If I go into a meeting, I can ramble. We did a little bit of that today. I can just go off on a tangent, but being able to really get that message really clear, I will so often just write thoughts down, and they might sit there and I might not touch them for a few months, and I'll come back to them and they're like, all right, that's what I was thinking. Does that still make sense? Can I refine it? Can I say this? Can I say this in a more effective way? When I talk to people with this language, are they getting it? If they're not getting it, what's wrong? How do I improve that? So documentation is a big one for me. And also selfishly, it just makes things easier. So many times I have to say the same thing over and over again, and I will just write it down so I don't have to. So it's a big time saver for me. And this is probably one thing that I learned, especially being a first-time product manager. When I at Me&U, when I started there, I was the only product manager. In my head, it didn't make sense for me to write a lot of this stuff down because who's going to read it? But there was so much stuff that had I written it down at early stages would have been so valuable at a later stage. That wouldn't have meant I didn't have to go back and think, gosh, what was the thinking behind this? I could have just gone, here's the doc, there's the thinking in there, hand it over. So yeah, I think one bit of advice would be, even if it seems like documentation is too early, I don't think it ever is. I think it's start writing things down. It'll make you a better writer, which will make you a better communicator. And even if I've got so many documents that no one's ever looked at. And I don't see that as a failure. I see that as it's helped me my communication. It's helped me write things down. And also in those cases, those 1 in 100 case where I need that information, or someone goes, what happened here? I go, there's the doc, here's the recording, here's what's happened. And it's saved me so much heartache.
There's so many tools now to make those things so much easier. Having a video call and using something like Fathom to record a video call, getting all the meat out of a video call meeting, and having that just makes them so much easier. What else are you using?
I was talking to some other PMs about this. I think I'm unconvinced on the AI notion, note-taking tools, because I think it's almost make people lazy. You're like, AI's taking the notes. I've got the recording. I can always go back to it. But do I have time to go back through that 1 hour call that I've just done and watch the whole thing again and go, what did Simon say? What was it, a 20 minutes? Was it 30 minutes? Even with transcripts, it can be quite hard. So I do think they are helpful, especially if you need to get that exact bit of information. But I'm always taking meetings and notes and trying to refine that down at the end. Because if you look at my notes at the end of a call, it's just mayhem. There's stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think it is important I see it as a backup tool, but I think if you're not taking proper notes, putting them somewhere that you can access later, even if you don't look at those notes, I think it just helps with that comprehension.
Yeah.
So you go, let me think back to that meeting that I had with Simon last week. At least having gone through that process of I'm going to take those notes, pack them up, I find it really helpful, and others might not. But I think there is a risk with some of the AI note-taking tools that people just leave the meeting and then they're like, all right, it's documented somewhere, or I'm reliant on the tool writing the follow-ups. But I think we see so much often the follow-ups or to-dos, they're not perfect. And even sometimes when I write them, they're not perfect. So to rely, and we need to go back and go, sorry, Daragh, I know you said these are the follow-ups, these are the to-dos. I'm unclear exactly what we're talking about here, or I was doing it this way, but I think that's wrong. Look at your notes. Yeah, I'm cautious of them. But that being said, I am using, I think I'm trialing out 4 at the moment. So it's a little bit awkward when I jump into a call and three bots join the meeting. But there's pros, but I just think don't be reliant on them.
Yeah. I think there must be something, I'm sure there'll be some research somewhere that there's this physical and cognitive link of you actually write something down and somehow it's more because you physically.
Definitely, yeah. I think they say that about handwriting, but my handwriting's too bad that I can't go down that road.
Yeah. I think that's where things are remarkable, because you still have the action, the physical action. Writing down,
I don't know if remarkable would pick up my handwriting.
No, I agree. Going back to founders, should founders always be speaking with customers and being involved in understanding more about customers, or is there a point they just hand that off now?
I think they need to be all the time. I think everybody in the business needs to be. Otherwise, I think you can get detached from like that bigger picture. You'll be like, oh, my team is the onboarding team. That's all I look at. And without having that bigger picture context, you might reach those onboarding goals or achievements that you're looking at. If it doesn't ladder up to that wider strategy, I think you can really start getting into the territory of technically I'm succeeding in this role, but it's not actually laddering up to the bigger picture. And I think talking to customers really helps with that. I think also, especially in early stage startups, sometimes the strategy is not clear. Sometimes or it's changing. So sometimes you can't go, what is our strategy for the quarter? Oh, it's halfway through the quarter. We actually haven't done the quarter strategy. That's very common. I think talking to customers is a good way, an amazing way to really make sure you're grounded to what's actually happening and not misled, but focusing on OKRs or quarterly goals when talking to a customer can help really reinforce that or help you challenge that. Because you might say, hey, we're really focused on X, Y, Z. I talked to a customer and they couldn't even log in. That's important. I'm not saying it's a made up scenario, but so I think founders, it's tough because there's so much to do. Half the time, fundraising, dealing with employees, talking to press, there's so much. But I think the value you get from talking to a customer, I think really helps so much. And even in all those places, like when you're fundraising, I was talking to a customer. This is what they're saying. That when I do some angel investment, when I hear that, I have confidence that they're not sitting in a room just making up ideas, talking to start. Why are we doing this? I'll tell you why. I was talking to customer X. You can relate that back to that strategy. So I think it's one that's easy to let slip to say, I don't have time, but I think it's one of the ones that's most valuable. But I'm a product manager, so I'm pretty biased there.
Yeah. What do you wish you'd known before you got into the world of tech? Or something you wish someone had told you back then?
Before, I wish someone had told me about product management earlier. I don't regret, obviously, doing my businesses and being in hospitality, but I had almost become a little resigned to never being able to work in tech, even though I had such an interest in it. I love using products, and in my businesses, I was always the first one to say, let's trial this product. We were very early on using iPad-based point of sales. I introduced like using Deputy for online time and attendance. We were in the initial trial group for using Uber Eats. So I've always been interested in that, but I couldn't code like I did year 11. But that's about as far as I got, and I thought if I can't code, I'd never be able to work in tech. And if I had known about the product role a bit earlier, I think it would have been something where I would have gone, oh, maybe let's interrogate that a little bit more and look into that one. That's probably, I don't know if that is answered kind of the question that you're talking about there, but that's what I would have hoped to have known about more. If I think about how do I help other people on that, talking to people about what product managers do, sometimes it can sound, I don't know, maybe you don't want to pull up at a party and I start talking about product management, but anyone that has its vague little interest, I'm always happy to share information there. And I do a bunch of mentoring and always happy to help those people that are considering getting into it or trying to break into it. I guess I see that's a good way for me to help give back, because I would have loved to be in a position where I could have learned from someone in a similar way.
Yeah. And I think that's one of our challenges in the industry is we've been talking about a talent shortage and I think most people, when they think of tech, they probably did what you did. I don't know how to code, and they think that tech is just coding. I think they fully understand the breadth of all the different types of roles you can do. So yeah, I think there's so much more there we can do. Do you think skills over experience? Sorry, qualifications over experience? Or
I've added attitude, really, for me. Qualifications, I think both of the degrees that I did, people have said that it can't be taught. So I did entrepreneurship as my bachelor after doing a couple of other degrees that I didn't finish. Everyone was like, you can't teach entrepreneurship, which I disagree on. I think maybe that initial drive, but there's so much that can be taught about entrepreneurship. Yeah. And then I think then when I did my postgrad, everyone, you can't teach product management. And again, I'm like, I don't believe that. I think it can be taught. I think anything can be taught. We can teach people to be doctors and carpenters. What is so special about product managers and entrepreneurs? I don't subscribe to that thought. When we look at product managers, I think a lot of product managers when hiring, they don't really care about qualifications. I think that will change. I think there's ability to teach these skills, but I think at the moment people don't care about that too much.
Yeah.
For me, if I think about the hires in product that I've been involved with, it's obviously there's some competency that needs to be there, but hired for a lot of more associate and entry level product manager roles, and they won't have that experience. So how, like they can't go to school to learn this.
Yeah.
So what if I go, you've got no experience in product management and you don't have a degree or just a course in product management? How can they demonstrate it? And for me, I think it's about that attitude. It's about also that, what have they done? I think one thing I do agree with is people talk about what's the best thing to do to get into product management is go and build something. Yeah. And for me to see someone do that is most important. Like they've gone out there, they've got an idea, whether good or bad, and they've built it, which I think is even easier today with so many AI coding apps out there. That's probably something that I think is most important.
Yeah. And I think those things tie in with the traits that we spoke about earlier for being a startup anyway.
Yep.
Tenacity, curiosity,
yep.
The willingness to do what you need to do to get something happening, and an empathy for your customer.
Yep.
Which I think ties in nicely to probably my last sort of question is, how do we get more people into the industry? What do you think from a skills perspective is important in the next generation of talent? We talk about the wave of AI and how easy it is to do the coding part of things. What skills do you think are going to be important in the next generation?
In case any engineers are listening to this, I wouldn't say the coding part is easy at all, but I do think that's not Simon said. I didn't say that. I think in terms of the skills, there's a lot you can do around prototyping really quickly now. In terms, I think that's quite a helpful skill, like being able to pick up these tools like Cursor, Lovable, Excel, and mock stuff up, get some examples, because you can write up docs but sometimes a prototype or an MVP or to prove a concept can be an easier way to communicate that to the team. And then I think that's really we're going to start seeing a lot more of that, like the merging of product into design and engineering. Not going to replace them, I don't believe. Not yet, at least. Maybe this could change in 2 months' time. But even with all those skills, it still goes back to, you can create a product that no one uses. It can be an amazing product, amazingly designed, great engineering, but no one uses it. So the balance of those two skills to make sure that we're still talking to people and creating things that people have value in, but then also being able to go, how can I keep this moving really fast? Because everyone else has these skills, these tools today. So it's not just a bonus to be able to do this. Everybody will be doing this soon. So all of your competitors will be moving at a speed which is insane to consider what it was a year ago, 2 years ago. So I think if I think about those future skills, that's I think highest probably on what I'd be looking out for.
Brilliant. You mentioned mentoring. Are you taking on mentees at the moment?
Always, yeah. Like I have LinkedIn, send me a message, happy to chat. I was doing some stuff through ADP lists. I think I turned that off briefly just when I started the Cuttable because things have been so busy. But I have done some mentorship through StartMate and some of their programs. And so if anyone has questions, I can always answer those. And I document resources. Going back to what we were talking about here about documenting things, I have a lot of people that go, how can I get into it? What would you recommend? I've put this into a Notion. I have a Notion I can share. And again, that's partly selfish, so I don't have to keep writing these lists together. But if anyone wants any help with any of that, please reach out and do what I can.
I'll put a link to those things.
Nice one.
Brilliant, mate. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Pleasure, mate. Cheers.
Cheers.